Now, a lot of statists like to bash me for turning the issue of human life into numbers with these arguments, which is of course utter nonsense because economics is everything in these matters. With bad economics, people are poor, and when people are poor, there is more suffering and dying. The two are interconnected. You can't separate them. But even if there's still people who insist on throwing math out the window and just talking morality, very well then. The moral argument against healthcare is that it is in fact backed by coercion. Coercion which is backed by threats and violence. We have a plan, and you will pay into this plan, or else. The money to pay for it comes out of my taxes. If I refuse to pay them because I believe the money is not being spent wisely, I will be sent threats in the mail, and if I continue to resist, I will be visited by people with guns who will kidnap me and lock me up. And if I attempt to defend myself, I will be murdered. This is what I mean when I say everything the state does is backed by violence. You can ignore this fact all you want, but it will not change. For an example, if I see someone mugged at gunpoint and I give him some of my own money to help him replace what was stolen, I think we can all agree that would be a very admirable gesture. However, if I were to point a gun at the next passerby and demand that he help pay the man who was robbed, would that be a moral gesture on my part? I really hope most of you would answer no. Well, isn't this exactly what socialized healthcare and indeed all welfare state programs do? There's people, lots of people who don't like these programs. They feel they're handled poorly and that there are way better ways to accomplish their stated goals. And there are people who depend on these programs and they've been let down for them. And I say, don't these people count in the equation? I mean, don't they have a right to have a say as well? If you want to send money to the state because you think they provide the service better than anyone else, that's your right and your choice. If you think this entitles you to demand that others be forced to follow suit under threats of violence, well, then you've got a bit of a problem there, don't you? The majority do not have the right to impose their will upon the minority in any society that wants to call itself civilized. It's nothing more than glorified mob rule. The suffering of the few does not ever justify the happiness of the many. This is a very anti-individualist view, and it was the justification for some of the most horrid acts of cruelty in history, and I like to think that we're a little smarter than that. So what's the solution? The solution is to allow people to run their own lives, making their own decisions with their own money. If you believe this to be fantasy, I ask you once again to read up on mutual aid societies. You also might want to look up what was the rationale for the American Medical Association being granted more control over the market in the first place. Before this happened, the market was not controlled by government at all. It was 100% free market, pretty much. If you look, you'll find that the AMA was not complaining that medicine was too costly or too unavailable for the public. The complaint was actually that it was too cheap and too available. Think about that. Now, if you want to try to make the argument that I don't care about the sick and the suffering, then answer me this one last question. As has been shown repeatedly, the cost of socialized healthcare has been on a steady increase since day one, just like all other state welfare programs. So I ask you this. All these people who are dependent on these programs, and they know of no other way to support themselves, what do you think is going to happen to them when the state finally runs out of money? Don't try to say it's not going to happen. The deficits keep going up, the costs keep going up, there's no end in sight whatsoever. No bill ever has stopped this trend. None. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. The debt's going up, no end in sight, and it can't rise forever. All the states in the world are doing this, and they are all going to eventually run out of money. Statism has never, in history, been financially secure. It runs up a bill and then leaves the next generation with the IOU, and this cycle continues until it finally collapses. So I ask you this again. When that day comes, what happens to all the people dependent on it? What are you going to tell them? I'm listening. Think very carefully about this. It's important. Until next time, as always, be aware, and be wise.